We're returning to one of the most disturbing child abuse cases we have ever covered. A 14-year-old Wisconsin girl found in what an official described as a house of horrors, rescued from a trailer weighing just 35 pounds. Her father, his adult daughter, her partner, they were already facing felony child neglect charges, but now there's a major development. The girl's stepmother has now officially become the fourth person charged. What led prosecutors to bring these new charges? How does this reshape the case against all four adults? We are going to break it all down with a former child abuse prosecutor who has handled cases just like this. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Let me tell you something. If you think the crime stories that I cover are scary, wait until you hear what's happening with your personal data online. Yeah, your name, phone number, address, it is all out there, easy for anybody to find, but our sponsor, Incogni, helps you disappear online. They track down where your personal information is being exposed, like on search sites or old forum posts, and they demand its removal. So once I signed up, they found over 50 databases with my information, and within days, it all started coming down. Setup takes minutes, you create an account, you authorize Incogni to do the rest, and with their new unlimited plans custom removals feature, you can submit specific links and a team of privacy experts will personally remove them. So if you care about protecting yourself online, take your privacy back with Incogni. Use code SIDEBAR for 60% off of an annual plan. We need to revisit a story that we've been following because there is a major update right now, a new arrest. And I have to warn you right from the outset, this is one of those cases that will stick with you. It will stick with you because it is so deeply disturbing, it is so incredibly unsettling, but it is also one where we are seeing the wheels of justice turn. Yes, all the defendants are innocent until proven guilty. Yes, they will have their opportunity to present their defenses, whatever those may be. But you gotta talk about what's happening here, okay? You might remember this. A 14-year-old girl in Wisconsin was found in what a court official called a house of horrors. She was rescued from a trailer on the brink of death, weighing just 35 pounds. This is according to authorities. Her own father, her stepmother, her stepsister, her stepsister's partner, they were all living in that home. Now, when we last covered this, three of them, the father, Walter Goodman, his stepdaughter, Savanna LeFever, her partner, Kayla Stemler, they were already facing serious child neglect charges. But now, the child's stepmother, Melissa Goodman, was a different story. We knew from the affidavit that she was in the home. We knew that there were text messages that were reviewed by police that seemed to paint her as a central figure in this case. But she was just in custody, waiting. There were no charges yet. Now we have this update. Melissa Goodman is officially the fourth person charged in this case. So, before this girl was ever rushed to the hospital, this criminal complaint, authorities, they allege that Melissa was right there in those text communications, talking about locking this girl who she referred to, or seemingly referred to as stupid, her door, talking about taking away her water, even giving the okay for another adult to physically abuse her, to hit her with a belt. And essentially the allegation is she allowed this 14-year-old girl to starve to death. Now, I'm going to break down exactly what these new charges mean, how the case against all four adults is shaping up. But to really understand why this development is a big deal, you got to understand the full picture of what police are alleging happened in this house. This story starts back in the spring of 2020. A young girl, who police, by the way, are referring to in these documents by the initials MJG, due to her being a minor, privacy, was about 9 years old when she moved in with her biological father, Walter Goodman, in a trailer on Hattie Lane in the town of Oneida. Now, she wasn't just moving in with her dad. The household also included his wife, Melissa Goodman, who is not MJG's mother, Melissa's adult daughter, Savanna LeFever, and Savannah's 15-year-old brother. Then you fast forward to August of 2021, and that is when Savannah's partner, Kayla Stemler, moved in. And that is when investigators believe that MJG's world really began to shrink. Investigators say her life became almost entirely confined to a single bedroom. Her father had allegedly installed a camera to constantly monitor her. Police claim they found evidence that her door was locked from the outside with a barrel bolt lock. In fact, they even found the specific lock, and the screw holes in the door and the frame matched it perfectly. So for years, if these allegations are true, this was essentially her reality. Let out only a few times a day under strict supervision, often just to use the bathroom. And this is where it gets even harder to comprehend, because over those years, police claim that her body began to waste away. She became horrifically thin, so much so that when first responders finally saw her, this is again according to the complaint, they thought she was a small child, maybe 6 to 8 years old. But she wasn't. She was a teenager. And this all came to a crisis point on August 21st. That is when Walter Goodman finally called 911. And on that call, which is in the court records, he tells the dispatcher that his daughter is lethargic, that she's breathing on and off, that she's moaning. And the way that he describes it is, quote, like she's comatose, but with her eyes open, but, quote, all creepy. He says she's grinding her teeth, stiffening up her arms like a board. So help comes, help arrives, and they find a scene that I can say is probably every parent's nightmare. And I apologize for how hard this is to hear. This 14-year-old girl was allegedly so emaciated that her collarbones, ribs, hip bones, they were jutting out against her skin. Her blood sugar was at a life-threatening 24 milligrams/DL. Just for reference, a normal level is considered, for that age, our understanding, anything at 100 milligrams, maybe a little bit less, /DL or higher. She also had a temperature of 100.6. She was rushed to a local hospital, flown by helicopter to Children's Wisconsin, where she was immediately put on a breathing machine. And there, doctors discovered she weighed just 35 pounds. Now, to put that in perspective, a typical 14-year-old girl weighs over 100 pounds. She was diagnosed with severe long-term malnutrition that had caused multiple organ issues. Her liver, pancreas, heart, they were all affected. Doctors say she even had osteoporosis. She had pressure sores from lying on the floor. Yet a prosecutor later say that she was, quote, very, very close to death. So Walter Goodman, Savanna LeFever, Kayla Stemler, they were all arrested and charged with multiple felony counts of chronic child neglect, the consequence being great bodily harm and emotional damage. But there was one adult from that household who until now had not been formally charged, the stepmother, Melissa Goodman. But now, this week, that gap has been closed. Melissa Goodman has officially become the fourth person charged in this case, facing the same serious counts of chronic neglect of a child for failing to provide the care, food, and medical attention that could have saved this girl from years of suffering. That's the allegation. All right, so to help us understand what these charges mean, the evidence against her, maybe why the delay, I want to bring in practice professor of law, former child abuse and sex crimes prosecutor, Marian Braccia. Thank you so much for coming back on to Sidebar. Love having you on. I got to start with the big picture here. We now have all four adults in the home facing these very serious felony charges. From a legal standpoint, what is charging Melissa Goodman, this stepmother? How does that complete or solidify the prosecution's overall case? Because we expected she was officially going to be charged. Now it's happened.
Yeah, I think that at this point, the prosecution theory is that every adult in this household neglected the care of this child, and no one it can be excused for their behavior. No one can be overlooked for their lack of supervision, lack of care, lack of basic human regard for the child that was in their care in this household.
I know you won't have the answer to this because you're not part of the case, but explain to me why the delay. Why not just immediately charge her, arrest her, charge her with the rest of the adults? There was a little bit of a delay. Any explanation for why that might have happened?
So there's any number of reasons why co-defendants, co-alleged perpetrators wouldn't be charged at the same time. There's always the possibility that investigators were completing their investigation, that they wanted more evidence against one particular defendant before they attached charging paperwork to that individual. It could always be an administrative delay. There could always have been communications with the defendant or through defense counsel to arrange for a surrender. I'm not saying that this would have been the case in this particular case or in this investigation, but sometimes even pre-charging, there can be communications with a defendant, again, through their attorney about potentially cooperating with the prosecution or proffering evidence to the prosecution. Again, no information about whether that happened in this case, but there's really any number of reasons why there would be a delay between one now alleged co-defendant and the three others who were previously charged.
I want to dig into the evidence that specifically implicates Melissa here, because we've heard Walter's side of it, but the complaint alleges that Melissa was right there, that she was right there during this medical crisis. And after first responders, by the way, they arrived, they found MJG with a blood sugar level of just 24. They asked Walter if anyone else in the house was sick. His response, that was captured by officers on scene, was, quote, "No, no one is sick in the house. My wife has kidney disease. My oldest daughter, she's overweight bad, and she's got lung issues." And he apparently indicated that Melissa would sleep in to watch MJG. Essentially, that she's a part of this, not, that she's there to care for her. And when you look at the messages, and we're going to get into this more, when you look at the messages, it is seemingly really bad. For example, in the complaint, there is an apparent message that Melissa had sent to Savannah on March 4th, 2025 at 2:38 p.m., which read, quote, "But MJG is not to be out of her room at all. And quote, I'll call when we're on our way to let you know her rules and so she doesn't hear them." On March 7th, 2025 at 12:24 p.m., Savannah apparently sends an image to Melissa, which is a photo of MJG lying on the floor of her room in the fetal position on her side. This is a direct quote from the complaint. It goes on to say, MJG is wearing pink underwear and yellow socks, which both have brown colored markings on them. MJG appears not well and severely malnourished as her bones are prominent and the top of her spine is clearly visible. Savannah apparently writes, "Knows you're home and is still redacted around." Melissa writes, "Did she move?" Savannah writes, "Nope, and she's been at redacted all night. I yelled at her all night." And Melissa says, "Let me know if she changes." Okay, Professor, from a legal perspective, what does this tell us? What does this tell us that Melissa was apparently present, aware that this young girl was seemingly in a, by all accounts, a life-threatening condition, yet no indication that she ever intervened and maybe contributed?
Well, Jesse, as you know, for a criminal case, there are two essential elements to prove any criminal charge. There has to be an act. In Latin, it's actus reus. There has to be some either commission or omission that was legally required, and there needs to be a demonstration by the prosecutor of what's known as mens rea, or a guilty mind, state of mind. State of mind is probably one of the hardest things that a prosecutor has to prove. You have to be able to show what was going on in someone's consciousness, what was going on in their mental process, as part of the proof element of any particular crime, of any particular charge. Very, very difficult to show intent or to show knowledge or to show what somebody wanted or desired the outcome to be. However, when you have text messages that clearly communicate a situation, clearly communicate what the condition of the child was, what they had been doing for any period of time, what they looked like, what they appeared like, their lack of movement or well-being. That really is, I would say, incredibly damning and powerful evidence for the prosecution to show that Melissa Goodman knew or should have known that this child was in need of care, was in need of either medical services or at a bare minimum food, and didn't do anything in terms of being proactive of providing that care and that support.
And by the way, as we go into this a little bit more, I think we talked about this last time, these child neglect charges, it's very different if you're talking about murder, you're talking about manslaughter. They're so broad that they can encompass a lot of activity, crimes of commission, crimes of omission, right? That's a tool that prosecutors can use, which I think is necessarily a good thing. Defense attorneys wouldn't like it. It might be more difficult to defend, but from a prosecutorial point of view, if you're talking about trying to seek justice against those who commit crimes against the most vulnerable in our population, and yes, she's innocent until proven guilty. They're all innocent until proven guilty. They'll have an opportunity to present a defense. The child neglect charges here are very broad, so it can include a lot here.
You can, and I think that was the legislative intent, because I think what's being communicated and the public policy behind very broad language that's included in this statute, in this criminal offense, is that, it's not enough just to have a child. It's not enough just to house a child, and it's certainly not just a crime, and of course I say just in air quotes, it's not just a crime to do something overt, meaning to hit, to punch, to abuse in some physical way in order to be held criminally liable under this statute. I think there is a legislative recognition that, once a caregiver is ostensibly in charge or responsible for the well-being of a dependent, of a child or another dependent person, that there is more that needs to be done other than just lock them in a room and forget that they're there.
Yeah.
And so this broad language goes to show that that again, it's not just enough to be a parent, to be biologically or in other way household related to someone who's in your care, that there are affirmative steps that need to be taken to care for that dependent person. And when they're not, that is considered a crime of omission.
Let's look a little bit more at the conditions that police claim Melissa was enforcing. So in the complaint, officers claim that they extracted photos from Melissa's phone, which include photos from the camera in MJG's room, which Melissa reportedly had constant access to. And police say they found one image from December of 2024 showing MJG lying directly on the bare floor, wearing only underwear and socks, 2 mattresses leaning up against the wall behind her, unused. There's also evidence suggesting that Melissa played a role in isolating MJG from the outside world, because the complaint reveals that in May, MJG's grandmother came to the house, seemingly asking to see her granddaughter. Melissa allegedly texted Savannah about what Walter told the grandmother, saying, quote, he told her that she's on a trip with his cousin. And I also want to look at something crucial in the complaint where Melissa Goodman appears to be trying to shift blame onto her husband, Walter. So when Child Protective Service workers first came to the home on August 22nd, this is the day after MJG was hospitalized, they asked Melissa why this girl hadn't seen a doctor in years. According to the complaint, Melissa told them, quote, MJG has not been to a doctor because Walter didn't like the pediatrician that she had. She then continued saying Walter never thought she needed to go. In another part of the conversation, she stated Walter was going to take MJG to the family doctor, but never did. Now, Professor, obviously, you put aside the idea if defense attorneys would ever say, well, is that exactly what she said? Is that assuming this is what she said? It seems, I don't know for sure, but it seems there's an emphasis here, maybe an argument that Melissa is putting the blame on others, putting the blame on Walter. But I wonder how much that can actually work when you have those messages. Those messages, it's different than just testimony. Messages like that can be tough to explain.
Yeah, I think it's going to be the job of the prosecution to show a very clear timeline, to show how long Goodman was in MJG's life, how long they had lived under the same roof, how long Goodman had been aware of her condition, and any assumption of responsibility that Goodman had taken over the time that she had been in MJG's life, because I think this is a fairly common defense in co-defendant cases, at least in child abuse cases that I've seen, where there is a shifting of responsibility. There is something of a pointing fingers at each other in order to distance oneself as a defendant from responsibility or from knowledge or from any kind of involvement in the criminal activity. And so these statements about everything that Walter, the father, the co-defendant, either wanted to do or refused to do or failed to do, I think are fairly good defense theory moves to distance Melissa Goodman from her responsibility in this case.
But the only way, and let me know if you've ever seen this before, where you can have one caregiver, one parent say, yeah, I knew what was going on. Yes, I participated in it. And somehow, I don't know, the charges are dropped, the charges are lessened. I don't know. A deal's worked out, is to suggest there had to been some sort of duress, right? Some sort of coercion that she was forced to do this, right? Isn't it the only way that there could be something to that, or am I not thinking about it the right way?
Well, I think that duress is certainly one possible defense, but I think, again, there is also the possibility of a lack of access. Melissa Goodman could say, I was barely with this person, this child. I was barely in the house. I barely knew her. I didn't have any responsibility for her, never did. That was the arrangement between me and my husband. I was just, just again, in air quotes, a stepmother and didn't have any caretaking responsibility. That was my understanding coming into this household or coming into this marriage. And again, there's always the a lack of knowledge defense. Now, I don't know how successful that would be in a case like this, especially given the webcam footage and given the text messages that are between the alleged co-defendants, but there are always any available defenses as far as a lack of knowledge, a lack of participation, a lack of association between the alleged co-conspirators, and a lack of, in this, or in your example, the presence of duress.
Now, the criminal complaint, the problem for her, the criminal complaint is filled with these text messages that would suggest she had more of a direct role in what was happening in that house. For instance, the complaint reveals that Melissa and Walter's 15-year-old son, who also lived in the home, was pulled into this situation as well, because you have a text exchange where Melissa apparently texts her son instructions, and these instructions are very, very chilling. She allegedly writes, quote, "Can you please make sure the door is locked and so is Stupid's, please?" A few minutes later, she follows up to clarify, "Okay, but make sure Dummy's door's locked and make sure the front door is to when you key her in, but don't forget to check Dummy's door." And this control that police allege, they say it was absolute, down to the most basic human needs. There's another exchange where Melissa writes, again, if you're talking about control even over something like water, she writes, quote, "Because last night I took her water away and then he took her to the bathroom and let her drink it." That's the problem, Professor. That's the problem, right? The level of control here. Is there a way a defense attorney can look at those messages? If they can't argue successfully to not have them included in a trial, which I'm not really sure what the argument would be, but if those do come into trial, what is a defense argument to try to provide a different context to that?
Honestly, Jesse, the only thing I can think of would be two challenges. One which could be heard pre-trial, to challenge the authenticity of these messages, to say that these messages, didn't come from a reliable device, that they weren't recorded properly, even so far as allegations that they are deep fakes or AI generated, or that they are not actually the words or the communications of the defendant. But the other argument, if they do come in, would be to whom they are referencing. And what I mean by that is we are referring to the complainant in this case as MJG, because obviously we want to protect child victims, alleged child victims, and not put their names in the press or put their names in public. We'll notice, however, that we are interpreting these messages referring to dummy or referring to stupid as referring to this child complainant, MJG. I could imagine a world where the defense will say, we were referring to the family pet. We were referring to something or someone else. We weren't referring to MJG, the complainant in this case. So you're assuming what my communications were in regards to, but you don't have proof that I was talking about this actual alleged victim.
Yeah, and one of maybe the most damning series of text exchanges occurs from January 2023. This is when Walter and Melissa were away from the home and Savannah and Kayla were left in charge of MJG. Now, Melissa is apparently remotely monitoring the camera, participating in a group chat with them. And in this chat, Kayla writes to Melissa, "Just so you know, MJG was taking more than one bite at a time. And when Savannah confronted her, she continued to argue with her, so I used the belt." Melissa's response, 2 words, "That's fine." Later on writes, "She deserved it." The complaint also alleges that Melissa was acutely aware of how bad things had gotten. There is this exchange with Savannah texting her, worried about MJG's deteriorating appearance, writing, "I am just scared because of how horrible she looks. I'm scared we're all going to go to jail or something." And Melissa's apparent reply was, "Yeah, I know. I live it every day." Now, Professor, your thoughts on that, but I guess the other question is, if you're looking at this case and a prosecutorial point of view, you wonder if you really want to take it to trial, expose jurors to all of this evidence. You also wonder if you want to make a deal with at least one of them to testify against the other. But I got to tell you, if all these allegations are true, who would you want to make a deal with? Who would you want to provide some sort of leniency to testify against the others? Because I don't know, it's pretty bad.
I think a lot goes into the calculus, and a lot goes into the determination of which defendant in a co-defendant matter would receive an offer for a non-trial disposition in exchange for either information or testifying or any other conditions. I think that the prosecutors in this case are certainly going to do a very thorough review of all four defendants' criminal histories, their knowledge in this case, their involvement in this case, any information, so-called mitigation information that the defense teams, the defense attorneys can provide. So I am sure that the prosecutors are going to have a very complete dossier of information before they decide who, if anyone, will be considered a cooperating witness or will receive any kind of offer for either leniency or a non-trial disposition.
There's also another layer to this case that we didn't mention that has made this alleged prolonged neglect possible, and that is the part that the victim's complete disappearance from the public eye, including from the school system. So the criminal complaint states that after attending school virtually for 1 year after COVID, MJG was reportedly homeschooled from the 2021-2022 years to the 2024-2025 years. So you have all these years where she apparently had no contact with teachers or school nurses or other mandatory reporters. And in Wisconsin, it's our understanding that the Department of Public Information requires homeschoolers to be registered. But once that happens, again, our understanding is there's no state statute that requires any agency to continually monitor the education or the instructional hours. It's a system that appears to be built on trust. So, Professor, unless I'm wrong, is that something you see as well, that this homeschooling situation could lead to prolonged abuse?
It could, Jesse, especially in a system like this where there is no mandatory check-in or examinations, meaning academic examinations, to ensure that the school standards or of the State Department of Education are being met by the homeschooler. So I think we saw this a lot, and you and I have been having these conversations for a long time now, that this was unfortunately one of the many byproducts of COVID, that COVID and the shutdown and our isolation, our quarantine allowed many children who were children and intimate partners who were more vulnerable members of society to kind of slip between the cracks and be forgotten and go missing and go off the radar, so to speak, so that any of the social services that would have otherwise been available to them, or any conditions that would have been mandatory reporting conditions, went unnoticed because we were in a shutdown and frankly, no one was watching. And in a case like this, even after quarantine ended or the shutdown ended, this child remained off the radar. And for all of these years now, her care, if we can call it that, has been neglected.
And according to Fox 11, the DPI can't even confirm, due to confidentiality purposes, if MJG was even properly registered. And it's balanced by the fact that in the law, in our society, in this system, there is an emphasis to maintain a child with their biological parent. There's an emphasis that you want to defer to the parent how they want to raise their child, but it gets complicated, it gets tricky. Now, Walter Goodman, Savanna LeFever, Kayla Stemler, they are all due back in court for preliminary hearings next Wednesday. What can we expect there, Professor?
Well, we'll see. I mean, either the preliminary hearing can proceed, or I would assume that Wisconsin has the allowance for a continuance date for further investigation or for the more complete compilation of evidence. But remember that a preliminary hearing is exactly what it sounds like. It's a preliminary stage of the proceeding. The prosecutorial standard is much less. The prosecutor does not have to present evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. In most jurisdictions, a preliminary hearing has a prima facie standard, which means that it's more likely than not that a crime was committed and that the person who's been charged, or in this case, the people who've been charged, are responsible for that crime. But again, it's not a reasonable doubt standard. It's more like a civil standard of 51%, if you will. So we'll see if the cases are bound over for trial in their court, in their trial court system, or if the matter will be continued for further investigation.
And I will take a guess that if you look at this, what has been alleged in this criminal complaint, and it's put forward by prosecutors, a judge would say there is probably sufficient probable cause that they committed these crimes and that the case should move forward towards a trial process. We'll see, though. And Melissa Goodman, she has her next court appearance set for a status conference next Thursday. So this is a story we'll keep a careful eye on. Professor Marian Braccia, thank you so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. You can follow me on X or Instagram. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.